Today, let's study about the law of Moses and the law of Christ. Nowadays, many of the Christian churches, they teach that the law was abolished. But, as we will study through the Bible today, the law of Moses was abolished, but the law of Christ was also established at that time. So, the Christians that insist that the law was only abolished and that there is no law that we have to follow is against the Bible's teaching. We can see through the words of Apostle Paul. Let's open the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 9. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 20. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 20. To the Jews, I became like a Jew, to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. In verse 20 he said, I am not under the law. But in verse 21 he said, I am under the law, under Christ's law. Through this, if Apostle Paul said in one verse he was not under the law, but later that he was under the law, then the only reason he can say that is there must exist two laws. The law that Apostle Paul is not under is the law of Moses. But here, the law that he is under is Christ's law, or the law of Christ. Therefore, it is against the Bible's teaching to say that there is no law, for we have to follow the law of Christ, as Apostle Paul said. Let's also see the book of Hebrews chapter 8 about this law of Christ. Hebrews chapter 8, verse 7. For if there had been nothing wrong with that first covenant, no place would have been sought for another. But God found fault with the people and said, the time is coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their forefathers when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they did not remain faithful to my covenant. And I turned away, and I turned away from them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my laws in their minds and write them on their hearts. Here it says, I will put my laws in their minds. Verse 10, this is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel. After that time, I will put my laws in their minds. Here, what does it mean? I will put my laws in their minds. When you refer to verse 7, he said, if there had been nothing wrong with the first covenant, no place would have been sought for another. But God said, a time is coming when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel. And in verse 10, I will put my laws in their minds. Then, what laws will God put in His people's minds? These are the laws of the new covenant, not the old covenant. He said, God will establish another covenant, a new covenant. And at that time, He will put His laws in their minds. And when you refer to verse 13, he said, by calling this covenant new, He has made the first one obsolete. And what is obsolete and aging will soon disappear. Here the first covenant means the Old Covenant. And the New Covenant is the covenant that was established by Christ 2,000 years ago. But also in verse 10, God said, I will put my laws in their mind. Here, the New Covenant and the law, they have the same meaning. Then, it means that the Old Covenant, it became obsolete when the New Covenant was established. The Old Covenant, or the law of Moses, it became obsolete and aging and disappeared when the New Covenant, or the law of Christ, was established. So, the law was not just abolished, but it was changed into the law of Christ. Let's see, chapter 7, verse 12. Hebrews chapter 7, verse 12. For when there is a change of the priesthood, there must also be a change of the law. Now here, the Bible didn't say that the law was abolished, but that the law was changed. The Old Covenant law of Moses was changed into the New Covenant law of Christ. Here, what's the meaning? It was changed. About this, let's see the book of Matthew. Matthew chapter 5, verse 17. Matthew chapter 5, verse 17. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. He said, I did not come to abolish the law or the prophets, but I came to fulfill them. Therefore, in Hebrews, when Apostle Paul said, the law was changed, it means that the law was fulfilled. So, the Old Covenant law of Moses was fulfilled by the law of Christ. Then, now, what we have to follow is the law of Christ. If the people insist that there is no law, and that they don't need to follow the law, even they insist they don't need to follow the law of Christ. But as Apostle Paul said, even he was under the law of Christ. So, are the Christians nowadays greater than Apostle Paul? No. Then, also we are to be under the law of Christ. We are to follow God's commandment of the new covenant, the law of Christ, in order to go to the kingdom of heaven. And when you see the Bible, the characteristics of God's people is not those who do not obey the law, but those who obey the law. You can see the book of Isaiah. Now let's open the book of Isaiah chapter 51. Isaiah chapter 51, verse 7. Hear me, you who know what is right, you people who have my law in your hearts. Here, what did God say? You people who know what is right, you people who have my law. Now, whose law is this? God's law. In your heart. This is written in the Old Testament time, but this word does not refer only to the Old Testament, but to the New Testament time. Because the Bible teaches we are under the law of Christ. Therefore, he said, you who know what is right, you people who have my law. Here also we can see, it means you people who have the law of Christ in your heart. God's people are not those who do not obey the law, or who insist that the law was abolished and that there is no law. Rather, God's people are the one who has His laws in their hearts. Also, let's see the book of Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 28, verse 9. Proverbs chapter 28, verse 9. If anyone turns a deaf ear to the law, even his prayers are detestable. God said, if anyone turns a deaf ear to the law, what's the meaning of deaf ear? Meaning, if anyone ignores the law, if anyone rejects the law, then also his prayers are detestable. Even though someone prays earnestly, day and night, but if he turns a deaf ear to the law, all of it is detestable in the eyes of God. Then judge for yourself. Are the prayers of God's people detestable to God? No. It means that God's people do not turn a deaf ear to the law. They obey God's law. Yeah, also, when you look at verse 4, those who forsake the law, who do they praise? The wicked. But those who keep the law resist them. Yeah, those people who forsake, meaning those people who do not keep God's law, they praise the wicked people and the wickedness. That's what they enjoy. But those people who keep the law resist them. Meaning they resist wickedness and evil. Yeah, who resists evil and wickedness? It is those who keep God's law. Then, shall we be the ones that praise the wicked or the one who resists him? We should be the one who resists the wicked, shouldn't we? It means that we should keep God's law. Yeah, God's people obey His commandments. They do not disobey His commandments. Yeah, let's see the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 12, verse 17. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey God's commandments and hold to the testimony of Jesus. When you refer to chapter 12, verse 9, you can see that the dragon represents Satan. Satan was enraged at the woman and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring. Then who are the rest of her offspring? It says those who obey God's commandments. It means those who obey the laws of God that Christ established 2,000 years ago. They are the rest of her offspring and those whom Satan wages war against. Even though Satan wages war against them, can Satan defeat them? No. Because God is stronger than Satan, right? Yeah, let's see. Revelation chapter 14, verse 12. This calls for patient endurance on part of the saints who obey God's commandments and remain faithful to Jesus. Yeah, since Satan waged war against us, God told us we should have patient endurance in obeying God's commandments, in following God's laws. Through this verse, we can see God's people, they are not the ones who disobey God's law. Rather, they are the ones who obey God's commandments, God's law. But there are the people who do not obey God's law, and also they insist that they are God's people. But are they really God's people? No. Look at the 1 John. 1 John chapter 2, verse 3. We know that we have come to know Him if we obey His commands. The man who says, I know Him, but does not do what He commands is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But if anyone obeys his word, God's love is truly made complete in him. This is how we know we are in him. Whoever claims to live in him must walk as Jesus did. Here, these words, we know that we have come to know him if we obey his command. And if anyone obeys his word, God's love is truly made complete in him. This is how we know we are in him. Whoever claims to live in him must walk as Jesus did. All of this word means they are the people who follow God's commandments and who keep God's laws. But those who say, I know him, but do not do his commandments, the Bible says, they are the liars. Then, it means they are not really God's people. They just say they are God's people. But we are not God's people because we say so, but because God acknowledges us as his people. Then, when you judge through the words of God, who can become God's people? Yeah. Satan waged war against those who obey God's commandments, and the saints are those who obey God's commandments. And you people who have my law in your hearts, then when you judge from all these words, we can see God's people, they are the ones who obey God's commandments, not disobey. Even though someone tries to give honor to God and worship God, but if they do not follow the commandments of God, then all their effort was in vain. Yeah, let's see the book of Matthew. Matthew chapter 15. Matthew chapter 15 verse 7. You hypocrites! Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings about rules taught by men. There are the people in this world that claim to know God, but they are following the teachings of men. So God said, actually they do not know me. They are the liars. And they only honor me with their lips. And they worship me in vain. What's the meaning they worship God in vain? It means all their worship is meaningless. Who said it? God said it. Then are we to believe what God said? Yes. We are God's children. We must believe what God said. That's why God let us know how to become His true children who will receive the promise of salvation. We should not insist that the law was abolished. Rather, we should search the law of Christ through the teachings of Jesus so that we may be saved by following His commandments as it was written in the Bible. Those who will be saved are those who follow the commandments of God, not those who ignore them. So, it is against the Bible's teaching just to teach accept Christ, and that's it. If we accept Christ, it means we accept what Christ said, and we accept what Christ did. Therefore, we can exclude none of Christ's teachings if we accept Christ. Those who say they accept Christ but do not follow His teachings, they are the liars, and they worship God in vain. Then, shall we follow them? No. We should follow only the truth of salvation. God told us the law was not abolished. It was changed. It was fulfilled into the law of Christ. The Old Testament law testifies about the New Testament law. That's why when we follow the law of Christ, we will become God's chosen people who will inherit the kingdom of heaven. But if we deny the law of Christ, then the only fate that awaits us is the destruction. Okay, let's open the book of Psalms, chapter 119. Psalms chapter 119. Verse 21. You rebuke the arrogant who are cursed and who stray from your command. Whom does God rebuke? The arrogant and the cursed. The arrogant and the cursed, they're the ones who stray from God's command. So, shall we become the arrogant and the cursed in the eyes of God? Never. We have to be the blessed children of God who will inherit the kingdom of heaven. Then, we should not stray from God's commands. Rather, we should obey them with all our heart and soul. Christ came to this earth and gave us the law of Christ that is written in our heart, the new covenant. Then, those who obey the new covenant, the law of Christ, will be saved and enter the kingdom of heaven. Then let's become those who will be saved by following the words of Christ. Let's not only accept Christ with our lips, but with our heart. By following the new covenant, by following God's commandments, all His laws will be written in our hearts. And then we will enter the heavenly kingdom without fail. That's why, brothers and sisters, let's remain faithful to God by having the patience and endurance in obeying His commandments. Let's keep the law of Christ, that is the teaching in the Bible, so that we may enter the kingdom of heaven at the last day. Thank you very much. God bless you.